Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Today, we're talking transformative text analytics that transforms market research. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools, and this is Now That's Significant. Joining us on the show to talk about this is Tovah Paglaro, co-founder and chief operations officer at Fathom That, an organization who seeks to be the most trusted text analytics software to drive empathetic decision-making based on open-ended listening and become the new standard for employee and customer and public opinion research. Thanks for joining us on the show, Tovah.
Thanks for having me, Michael. That was a nice introduction.
You're welcome. Now, Tovah, this is a part of the show where we ask our guests to share what will be the most significant thing they have to contribute. So no pressure, right? So what say you?
Yeah, so what's the most significant thing to contribute? I guess, the thing that has woven through all of the things that I've done in my career, including what sort of sits at the center of what we're doing with Fathom, is the ability to understand people's stories. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the most significant thing that we are all seeking to achieve when we're doing research, is to understand what's at the heart of somebody's story and how does that story connect to our story and to other people's stories. What's the fabric that weaves those things together? And that sort of sits at the heart of behavior change. It sits at the heart of the outcomes that most of us are looking for. And it is the most challenging thing. Like, language is hard. Understanding other people is hard. But when it happens, that's where the magic happens. And so right now, the most significant thing that I think that we're contributing is the ability to do that, to be able to understand people in their own words at representative scale, which means you can do it with the confidence to actually act on that, to find the kinds of insights that aren't just individual stories, but that also weave our collective story. And weaving our collective story means that we can imagine new possibilities based on that story. And that's really the piece of the work that is most exciting to me, and probably where I've spent the greatest effort towards contribution, at least.
Oh, very cool. The story just makes me imagine this one big giant book that you just have to pull over and reading that collective story would be quite large, wouldn't it? So thankfully we've got some tools to help us to look into all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're not wrong, but I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if understanding people was as easy as opening a book? It isn't. People aren't quite so forthcoming, but we do have tools now, and I think we also have like a shift in our collective curiosity around story. There was a time, I think, when there was an effort to get enough data points about people to be able to make decisions based on data. And I'm certainly not saying, I will never say throw out the data, but the point of all of that data is to understand people. And that exists in story. And so I think now we're feeling that shift back towards, okay, cool, how do we like integrate all of that data and layer in all of the complexity and enable like that empathetic understanding that really gives us the confidence to act. And I think that's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, true. So I believe Fathom is the second company you've started now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So why text analytics? Why now? What's the story behind Fathom?
Okay, so those are, I think, probably three separate questions, and I'm going to start with the last one. So what's the story behind Fathom? So you're right. This is the second company that I've started in this space. I've spent most of my life existing in some way, shape, or form in service of understanding people in order to take action. So actually the first half of my career was in film and television as a producer, as a creator of story, and as a TV exec. And then I shifted from there into a campaign environment. I had a background in communications and in marketing, degrees in both of those things, and shifted into campaign development, telling stories in service of something in order to drive action, a call to action at the end, and people take action. And as I spent time in that space, I became pretty frustrated with the research tools that existed, that it didn't really give us the depth of understanding that I wanted in order to be able to do my work. And so when I went into creating first Avalanche Insights and then Fathom, both of those are with the approach of a researcher. Like, what is it that I need in order to do the work that I'm doing? And in particular, the challenge that I found was that, like, okay, if we need better creative, we need better strategy. If we need better strategy, we need better research. And the challenge that I was really feeling when research is that you are always forced to trade off between sort of representative scale, the confidence of representative scale, and the depth of that sort of more qualitative insight, or, you know, the scale of polling, or 12 people in a room with a box of donuts. And, you know, we're all having those conversations. We've all been in those conversations of like, well, the polling says this, yeah, but my auntie, who is part of this other kind of group that we're trying to understand, told me at Thanksgiving that. And we were always trying to triangulate between those things, and that didn't feel good enough. I wanted to solve for that. My co-founder and I wanted to solve for that. And so that's what we started to experiment with, is how do we get the depth of a focus group, but at the scale of polling. And we did that originally in a company called Avalanche Insights, which went on to become one of the sort of leading companies in the progressive and democratic ecosystem, working with candidates and causes and values aligned companies, always with that mission of depth of a focus group at the scale of polling. And when we went off to do that, we certainly didn't intend to build technology. What we wanted to do was deliver those insights so that our clients could have these transformative outcomes based on that kinds of breakthrough insight. And what we found was that the tools didn't enable that to happen. We couldn't find a text analytics tool that enabled us to make sense of language with the kind of depth and context adaptability and nuance that we needed to do our work, at the kind of speed that we needed to do our work. An example, after the attack on the Capitol, we were in the field within 4 hours, listening to samples of 10,000 representative, Americans. Half of those open-ended questions, 20 questions, half of them open-ended, and then we were briefing every 72 hours to a really robust set of ecosystem partners. So we needed to be able to make sense of a lot of data really, really quickly with a lot of depth in really complex situations. So we started building those tools. And after about 5 years, we realized that the most powerful part of the company at this point was the technology, the ability to make sense of language, and also in service of our theory of change, my personal theory of change. The more we can understand people, the better the sort of outcomes are going to be, our collective outcomes are going to be. That the most powerful thing we could do in service of that was also to put the technology in other people's hands, to make this tool available to all of the researchers instead of just our one company. And so we separated into 2 companies. We sold Avalanche Insights, and it now exists as part of AB Partners. So that it's a design and creative agency that has an excellent, if I do say so myself, research arm now. And we launched Fathom, taking that core tech and making it a self-serve platform that all researchers can use to make sense of language at scale with that same sort of depth and context and nuance. So that's the why Fathom. You said, what's the story behind Fathom? Why Fathom? Why text analytics now is sort of a different question. And it pulls together, I think, like two things you've already brought up a little bit. And then also a third piece around like AI and what's happening. But I think the first is that the market research industry, like the same train that I was on at the time, these tools aren't good enough. For us, we want to be able to understand people as people. We want to be able to move as quickly as the world is moving. There was a time when you could train on a big data set and you could say like, okay, we're going to make predictive decisions based on a big data set, and the world is going to be something similar 3 years from now. And so that big data set is going to help us to predict what we should do in this other moment. That's not really true anymore. Like, things are changing so rapidly. Public opinion is changing. Political context is changing. Economic context is changing. The trends, the movement, because of things like social media, because of the sort of global dynamics that we're in right now, we know that the world is changing faster than it really, really ever has before. And so making decisions based on large data sets from the last 10 years is not going to help you to do a great job of what you should do in the next 10 years. We need really, really adaptive tools that allow us to listen quickly at scale as things are moving and make responsive decisions as quickly as possible. So that's one piece of why, is like that trend is happening in the industry. And I think it's a really, really good trend. It's an important trend. I want to be a part of it. The second part is that I think we are also moving towards an understanding of like empathy and story, and humans are important within that. They're not just data points. We need that more holistic understanding of them. We need to treat them in that really respectful way as researchers. We need to be curious. And so that means we need to be able to ask them open-ended questions. We need to not say like, please fit yourself into one of these check boxes, but instead tell us about how you're thinking about this thing, how you're feeling about this thing, why this thing matters to you, what kind of experiences you've had with it, what you wish could happen, what you're afraid might happen. We need to be able to answer all of those questions That means we need text analytics. And then the last piece is because we actually can right now. There's been a technological barrier until now. It's not, I don't think that we had some sort of epiphany that this was important. I think, we were part of a wave of a lot of other organizations that all, and smart people that were all like, this is important. And also the technology made it possible now. And so, we can have that whole conversation around what are the aspects of technology that are making that possible now. But I think, there has been until now a barrier to being able to understand language with nuance, with accuracy, with context adaptability, and with speed. And now there isn't a barrier to being able to do those things, at least some of us are overcoming that barrier.
For sure. So what are the main kinds of problems that Fathom helps insights teams to overcome?
Yeah, great question. So, we work with really kind of two personas of researchers primarily. So we work with a lot of market research companies, folks who are doing consumer insights or market research, and they're delivering those insights to enterprise clients and are working in that consultancy type space. And the biggest thing that we see with those folks is that we're saving them a ton of time, and they can just deliver time to value to their clients so much faster. On average, sort of 75 to 85% of the time that they were spending on open-ended analysis, they're able to cut that out, and that they're able to deliver with confidence. So the other thing that we hear from those folks is that, and I certainly have been in this position myself, when you don't have that really, really detailed analysis, you end up in a conversation with your client where they're like, well, I kind of think maybe I see this in the open-ended. And you're like, well, but here's all of the reasons that we're really quite confident that this is what we're seeing in the open-ended. And you end up with kind of a tension that isn't helpful, and you're wasting a lot of time. So it's not just getting the text analytics and saving a bunch of time there, but also being able to move forward with your client really, really quickly based on a shared understanding with a ton of transparency in it. And so that is sort of one group of folks, and for them, saving time, saving money, being able to deliver more efficiently, but also with more confidence and accuracy and more alignment with their clients is a lot of what we hear there. On the other sort of side, we also work with large enterprise clients, and so working with the insights teams there. These are often folks that are doing NPS surveys, they're doing cancellation surveys, they're doing bespoke market research or brand research based on what they need to understand. And I think the biggest thing that we see there is sort of two pieces. One, the insights are far more actionable. So there's a client, for example, a really large company that we work with. They knew that the detractors in their NPS were unhappy with something about product. And they'd done a lot of training on a model to be able to do text analytics based on historic data. And so they knew based on that, okay, cool, there's these detractors, and the thing that they tell us and the why is that they're unhappy with an aspect of product. And then they were kind of whack-a-moling from there, right? Okay, so maybe we need to make these changes to product and these changes to product, and we're doing a lot of reading and we're coding manually by hand, and we're trying to figure out all of those things. And they started working with the platform, and instead they were able to get a really, really detailed understanding of what was going on with the product. And what was interesting there is it was completely not the way that they thought about their product. The challenge that they were having was a usability challenge, not a design challenge, and they were dealing with it as a design challenge. And so they were able to pass really, really actionable insights onto their product team about this group of people that mattered the most to them, their detractors, and within literally weeks could start taking action. And that also really created a different kind of relationship between the CS Insights team and the product team, because now they were handing something from the CS Insights that was very, very actionable product. And that did a really, really positive thing for the feedback loop there as well. So that's the other really positive outcome that we see from that. And then the third piece, I said two, but now I'm going to do three. The third is breakthrough insights, things you just had no idea to look for. You just had no idea. And that happens often either in a situation where something is stuck. We see this, sometimes in a policy type situation where it feels like there's this barrier, where there's a tension, where you can't meet the needs of two competing audiences or audience segments or political segments. And in asking open-ended inquiry, where you don't have to fit people into any of your pre-described boxes, you can often find a different pathway, a new possibility that you just didn't know was there. So I can tell some stories about ways that has happened, but these sort of breakthrough insights, things that you find in language that you didn't know to look for, or emerging trends. You can only put things on a multiple choice checklist if you know to put them on a multiple choice checklist. And so in text analytics, you can see them coming up way sooner. You can see oh, nobody was talking about it. And then a few people were talking about it in the tracker. Still not something we're going to like find and put in a multiple choice. And now twice as many people are talking about it. And maybe it's actually still only 2% of people, but it went from 0 to 2% in 8 weeks. And if it doubles again, now we're starting to get into something we really care about. And you're able to get ahead of that just so much sooner.
Yeah, sure. And getting ahead of it can be the difference. Quite significant market share grab as well.
Huge difference, huge competitive advantage, huge ability to not lose market share when things are going the wrong direction. Confidence, we hear a lot about like the confidence of executive leadership teams, often things that like a CS team knows or an HR team knows, or even like a market research team knows, where they're like kind of right in it and they're like, we feel it, we know it. But you don't have a way to be like, look, we see it. Now we can actually have a presentation with our executive team and figure out how to take action on it so much sooner. And so that's something that we see. An example, when we were working with Fiverr, they were listening to all of the gig workers. And within a quarter, they were able to see that the gig workers talked about how much they loved independence and freedom and risk and all of the things that you think about of sort of that lifestyle. But the biggest downside was a certain version of a safety net that was missing, and that provided risk to people that they love because they couldn't provide healthcare. And that if they could provide healthcare in some way, shape, or form, many of them who were looking to sort of like leave the gig industry and look for more stability would stay, which is obviously an outcome that Fiverr cares about a lot. And this, I can tell this story because it's in their impact report. In less than a quarter, they were able to gather those insights, present to the executive leadership team, find a healthcare plan, and launch the healthcare plan. And they only had the confidence to do that because of the way that they really understood people very, very deeply, because of the open-ended inquiry that they could do, and then the really, really quick text analytics.
No, it's a great example of organizations being able to listen and then enact,
act quickly and powerfully.
In
support of the organization and the people. This is that thing that I always say, like the better outcomes for people and for the organization. And that's what we want, is to be able to enable both of those things. They have to be synergetic.
You mentioned something before about your, I guess, outlook is understanding, being able to deliver greater understanding, and then putting the ability to understand into the hands of decision makers and people in organizations. And that's something that resonates with us and kind of been a guiding light for us at Infotools as well. Really important to enable people to get closer to their data. It's their data after all. And so they want to be the ones using it. They're the ones that are best position to dive deeper into the findings as well, because they've got their experience and their views, their understanding of their customers. So opening up that has been challenging, I guess, because you've got some people that want to do that, some people that don't, but we feel that there's a bigger momentum swing towards those that want access now, which is good to see.
I think so. And I think it's incumbent on us, the people who are creating the tools, you and I and all of the other companies in this space, to also understand those users. And so like, what does that mean to deliver a delightful experience? How do we do that in a way that's research-centric focused, not sort of data focused, so that the dashboards, the interface, the analytics are like a delightful, fun experience, because they should be. They're your people. Like, you're obviously in this space because you want to understand them. And so how do we design in a way that enables people to follow their curiosity and to have like a really delightful experience in doing that and in deepening that understanding? I think that's something that I see like a lot of positive momentum. I don't think we're the only folks that are doing a really good job of that right now. But I think it's part of that same thing of like really understanding that the folks who value their customers and who value their employees and who value public opinion should have an interface that enables them to like really dive into that understanding without needing a sort of really, really high level of degree in statistical analysis or some of those pieces. Obviously, those things matter as well. And we need dashboards that enable all sorts of advanced analytics, but those things don't necessarily equal understanding, and they don't necessarily equal a delightful experience. And we want to enable both of those things.
That's right. And dashboards are great. And a lot of analytics platforms have them, but they don't necessarily they're not necessarily the only way to deliver understanding either. There are other options, and sometimes it may just be an email or a text or something that's just enough for certain people.
Yeah, different stakeholders need different things, and the tool needs to adapt to that. It needs to enable your researcher to do the research and your executive audience to get what they need, and sharing out to be easy and inviting in to be easy.
So what's the general feeling that you've come across with market researchers towards text analytics?
Skepticism, I would say, even cynicism some of the time, but also like pent up energy and demand. Like, I think absolutely people want to more deeply understand their folks. The number of conversations that I've had where I hop on a call with someone and they're like, oh, we're really curious about this. Also, like, just so you know, we've pulled most of our open ends out of our survey question and our customer feedback forms because we just haven't been able to analyze them well. And so we know that we're not doing good work with those. We want to pull them, we've pulled them out. But if we had a tool that we could actually trust, we would love to gather that data. Or the number of conversations that I have with like really big, amazing organizations who are doing brilliant work that are like, well, the way that we make sense of this, because we've tried all of the tools that exist, is literally pouring everything into Excel and then manually coding with binary coding in Excel, thousands and thousands of data points. And we know that that is fraught with like bias and human error and also costing us a ton of time. But we have never found a tool that enables us to make sense of the data in a way that we have confidence in. And I've had that experience, so I understand the cynicism and the skepticism. But also, like, the flip side of that is that then when folks jump in, just delight. like it's an unlock, the ability to be able to just ask the questions that you want to ask, and you still have to like design them well, because garbage in, garbage out, as we all know. But to ask good questions, rich questions, and then to be able to follow those answers and ask more good, rich questions at scale. So you've got that representative confidence. Like, it's just an unlock for people. And so I find the pattern is generally like curiosity, but like with a fair amount of skepticism and doubt. And then, they jump into either a demo or a free trial, and then sort of delight and like a release of pent up energy. Oh my gosh, could we do this? Could we do this? How could we pull this back in? And that's really, really fun to see, like fun to see folks being able to act on language, to be able to understand people, and then to move forward with confidence based on that much, much deeper understanding, much better decisions being made.
Yeah, I think just a really good illustration of how far things have come. All you need to do with technology, and it doesn't matter if you're a text analytics or a data analytics platform or whatever, just get people to think about the original chatbots and like the experiences they had with those, and then compare it to a Chat GPT or Bard. They're two completely different things now, and what was possible back then and what's possible now, day and night.
Completely. And I think it's really important that as we're moving forward into the adoption of more of those things and the transformation of these abilities, that we're doing that with like a ton of transparency in terms of how things are being automated and what's happening underneath of the hood, and the ability for humans, our system is a human in the loop system. It will always be. We have no desire to completely automate humans out of it ever, in order to be able to ensure that we can continue to have confidence and guidance in the tools that we're building and the tools that we're using. So I love that you brought up some of the LLMs, the Gen AI stuff that's happening there. I think that's interesting. The second piece that we're hearing right now, there was a moment. So we launched Fathom, and then all of the LLMs kind of exploded like a quarter later. And there was this moment where everyone was like, I think maybe we aren't going to need this. Like, maybe text analytics is just solved because LLMs, huzzah. And now we're actually seeing like the other side of that, where folks are like, oh my gosh, hallucinations and like a lack of data quality. And we don't understand how these themes are being created when we're just pushing something through there. And also it comes out in a format that we actually like can't use and can't analyze. It's and so now we're actually dealing with skepticism in a positive way, like a healthy skepticism on both sides. I've used old school text analytics tools. They didn't give me what I needed. I've tried a lot of them. So I have a little skepticism about something new. And also I've tried ChatGPT or, any of the other LLM based interfaces that folks have tried. And we had these challenges around hallucinations and interpretability and validity and transparency. And so we're looking now with like a healthy understanding of both of those challenges for something new. And so I think we're seeing actually both of those things in the market right now, which is good. I think we need to have skepticism in order to create new things that work well.
That's right. So from the skepticism, what do you feel is needed to help people see the value and use of newer technologies, like Fathom, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on which kind of skepticism. I always think that any new technology or any new solution, it doesn't need to be a technology solution, but any solution, innovation, intervention should be in service of an outcome. And so what is the outcome that we are seeking as an industry, and how are we going to measure success against that outcome? And any intervention is going to lead to both positives and challenges. Like that's no matter what the intervention is, no matter what the technology is. And so how are we having shared understanding about what those challenges are, as well as what those gains are, and mitigating the challenges as much as we possibly can, and also empowering people to understand when they're showing up. And that comes back to that transparency. You know, we can do everything we possibly can to mitigate challenges with any intervention, with any innovation, with any new technology. And also at the same time, while we're working on, you know, all of those aspects around guardrails and data ethics and best practices and all those kinds of things, we also need to have a ton of transparency so that humans can continue to look at their data and understand what is going on with it, so that they know when they need to take action. And that's part of those AI ethics guardrails is building that transparency and building that human review and building that deep understanding for the end user, for the customer, around how their data is being processed, how it's being used, who has access to it in order to do what it actually means when something is being suggested or not suggested, how they can intervene in those suggestions, where they can put their human input in, where they can validate that, like, for example, like I'm thinking specifically Fathom, you know, that a theme name actually represents the text itself. Building all of that in is how we support adoption, the confidence of adoption, but also do something good, because that's how we enable, like, oh shit, am I allowed to swear?
It's fine.
Oh darn, something didn't work the way that it was supposed to in this one use case. That's going to happen, for all of us. And it's important that a customer can see that, identify it really quickly, and resolve it. And that's sort of building with transparency.
One thing that interests me with the whole text analytics thing is, I mean, the whole think, say, do is often, they're very different things. So what people may obviously think is different to what they say. They may not say everything that they are thinking as well. So how are you working with brands to bridge those gaps?
Yeah, super good question. So I think there's like a couple of different angles that different folks are coming at that from. And probably the one that we spend the most time on is supporting folks with good design. And by good design, I mean design that enables the closest synergy between think and say. And so it's really, really important, obviously, and it sounds banal when I say it, but is also kind of like the key to everything, that you ask a question that is actually the thing you want an answer to. So for example, you know, if you bring in double barrel questions, what's the most important thing to you about X and Y? And then you run text analytics on that, it is very difficult to have a clear understanding and a lot of confidence between what is what and what is why within that question. And so how do we disambiguate those two things? How do we design well for that? If we say, what is the most important thing that, I'll use a political context, but what is the most important thing that government could do today? That's a really, really, really broad question. And maybe that's the question that you want an answer to, but maybe you actually want, what's the most important thing that our local government could do to make your day-to-day life easier? That's actually quite a different question. And that level of specificity is going to lead to a different kind of outcome. What we have found pretty consistently, we've got about 30 million data points at this point, and have run like hundreds of thousands of questions through the platform, is that when people are asked a specific question that demonstrates curiosity, that they believe will be acted on with integrity, So they trust in the brand, the organization, that whoever's asking, and that they can understand and interpret, well, they give you pretty darn good data. Most people are pretty happy to talk about themselves, their opinions, their experiences, and you're always going to have some amount of, bias in anything. That's true anytime you're asking anybody anything, and certainly we can run text analytics and other things, but that's also true in any other space. Like if we scrape social, and there's a whole bunch of reasons that we could get into around why that may or may not be ethical, but let's say somebody was scraping social and analyzing that, that's somebody's persona as well. That isn't a holistic understanding into what that person's views truly are. We all know we say things on social, and many people say things on social that don't fully capture their views, their opinions of anything. And so I tend to believe that when we ask good questions through a mechanism that people trust, they trust that their opinions are valued, that their time is being valued, that the opinions will be acted on. And those things are really, really important, especially like in an employee engagement situation. And we ask them questions that they can understand, that they can give a meaningful answer to, a specific and valid, meaningful answer. People give you pretty darn good data.
Yeah, very interesting. I was going to ask on the impact of generative AI on Fathom, but we have really talked about that, haven't we? Yeah. Anything else that we didn't cover on that subject, on how it's been able to help the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's certainly been transformative for the industry and for us as well. I think to whatever extent it's helpful to talk about, we have certainly built a tech stack that incorporates Gen AI, and I don't see any reason not to be doing that. I think it's also really important, though, that organizations like Fathom are really clear. Anybody that is incorporating Gen AI is really, really clear about how they're doing that, what their APIs. We have closed APIs, which means that any of the LLMs that we're using can't train on a customer data. We have a ton of integrity and privacy and security issues in place. We have partnerships with more than one LLM, so we can use of the big LLMs, so we can pull from different places as makes sense based on the data set, and make sure that we're minimizing the bias that is inherent in any one of those at a time. We also see like a huge gain in building and training our own models, right? Because they're specific for this exact use case. That means that we can deliver much, much faster than if you just push something through something like a chat GPT, and at a lower cost than if you push through that way, right? Because it's trained specifically for this use case. And I think that's where we're going to see just a ton of continued innovation, not just from Fathom, but in the space as we continue to better understand all of those pieces. So yeah, and then I guess the last thing is that I think it's really, really important, and I'll just continue to shout this from mountaintops for a really long time, probably, that regardless of if it's like Fathom or anybody else, that the human component is critically important when we are dealing with people's language. When people have given us, they've taken the time and energy to share their valuable responses with us. And when we want to use those for a specific outcome, that we've been transparent with the customer, the user, the audience about, that it's really, really important that we have that human component in there that is guiding the application of the AI towards that outcome, that is continuously reviewing and verifying that what is happening is intended to happen, and that we're really, really transparent with everybody that we're working with about how we're using AI, and giving as much transparency into the outcome as is humanly possible, so that the customer can also verify and have confidence in everything that's happening within the platform.
No, sure. Now, what you were talking about there in terms of training your own data set, I think that's a really important point, especially with, I'll say, niche segments or sectors like market research, for instance. So we've been time and time again been compared to your Tableaus and your Power BIs because we're a quantitative analysis tool. So they do data analysis, we do data analysis. Surely the same results can be found, but when you dig a little deeper, you go, okay, they're actually aggregating data and then analyzing that. We maintain respondent level data, so the use cases, the quality you're getting out of it, and the confidence too is really important. When it comes to AI and text analytics, the same thing. If you've got a local language model, so your own trained one that's been trained specifically on market research text analytics, then the quality of answers and insights you're going to get out of it will be
much faster and so much higher. Is definitely what we're seeing. And I mean, even things as like sort of in the weeds as code frames, right? Like in a certain context, all of those different product features might all be part of, I don't know, car. And within a product research or a user research context, like understanding who is talking about which features and being able to go back and forth between those things is like critically important. It's literally why you're doing the research. And so how you want to structure your code frame needs to be adaptive for the research question that is in front of you. In order for the text analytics to be useful at all. And so building for that, I think, is just like critically important and it can't happen in a larger, non-specific structured model.
Very true. Okay, so final question. How do you see the market and research industry evolving in the next 5 years? What should insights teams be doing now to prepare themselves for this future?
Well, that's a good question. How do I see them evolving in the next 5 years? I have so many thoughts. I keep thinking about like where we all were 5 years ago. And I'm remembering like pre-COVID and pre many changes in terms of what was available in the sort of AI space. And you know, that it just all of the, anyway, so I'm sort of thinking, okay, where are we actually going to be 5 years from now? I think we are definitely going to see a massive acceleration around the adoption of AI within the market research industry across the board. So I think that is going to look everything from summarization and sort of, you know, automated insights to text analytics and what we're doing to predictive analysis and more future thinking and the integration of those things. I think that's going to enable a really big shift towards mixed methodology. I think we still exist in a space right now of like, I'm a qual shop and I'm a quant shop, and I sometimes use both of those methodologies in order to get to this outcome. And as we have more and more tools that allow survey design to be responsive, you know, everybody doesn't actually need to have the exact same survey experience as these tools get integrated, that allow analysis to be iterative and responsive in the way that we're talking about, and text analytics tools to come into play. That allow design principles to be able to build all of those pieces in. We're going to see more and more of a shift away from these really sort of antiquated ways of differentiating what we're all looking for, which is a holistic understanding of people, to a really big move towards all sorts of different versions of mixed methodology. Not that we're not going to still sometimes do each of the things, we 100% are, but that we're going to see more of a shift towards deeply understanding people at scale in a whole bunch of different ways, which is what I think of when I think of mixed methodology. I think those are, you know, one of the big trends, and AI is enabling that. But I think as opposed to like, we're going to see the adoption of AI, it's more important to think about like, okay, what's that going to mean? Like, I think that's going to mean that we get to move towards mixed methodology. I think it also means that we get to move towards researchers getting to focus on strategy, right? You've got tools that can help you with some of the in the weeds, that you can use those tools to guide, just like all of the other tools, but it's going to get even more efficient in our ability to do that, which means we can focus our time even more on strategy, on outcomes, on okay, and therefores, which I think is super exciting. That's why we're all in the space. I think both of those things mean that things are going to move way faster. Everything that we've seen in the last sort of 10 years around content testing and the importance of content testing and predictive outcomes and optimization, I think that's going to start to move even faster as we can put these two pieces together. I don't know if that's good or bad. I have no idea, but it's going to happen. And then the last piece is I'm hopeful that we continue to shift towards researching people instead of researching numbers. And I see that shift happening in a whole bunch of ways, in the ways that we're presenting data, in the ways that we are treating respondents on panels, and compensation structures and equity around those things, in the experience design work that I see happening to provide, really positive experiences in that space, in the understanding piece that we've been talking a lot about, wanting to understand people's stories, not just them as data points. And so I think that shift that has been happening, I think honestly for like the last sort of 5 years, really, where we've moved from just like a celebration of big data to back to like, okay, but also that needs to be pulled into story and into empathy and into understanding. I think we're going to see that continue, and those two pieces come closer and closer together. That we need both. We need to pull them together in service of those outcomes. Right. Those are some of the things that I think are going to happen. What about you? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think you've touched on several of them anyway. So I think that need for collaboration is going to be even more and more important. So you mentioned we've got a number of tools. You've got a lot of people that want a one size fits all tool that does it, so you can just go to it for ease of use. But then you've got the others which want the best in class. So likes of working with Fathom for text analytics, and then Infotools for data analytics, or whatever it is. So you're needing to have that collaboration within vendors, within teams as well. So just different departments. I guess you're going to start having more millennials and Gen X is in exec teams as well. So people that are far more data savvy and open to using different technologies as part of their daily work. So not saying that others don't now, but that's going to start, I guess, pulling a whole lot of people together. Interesting time we're moving into.
Yeah, super, super interesting time. And I guess the piece that like layers over all of that, I'm sure you're involved in some of the groups as well, but I sit on groups in like the AI and human flourishing group out of Harvard, and the Stanford ethics and tech and policy and AI groups. And so I think I get to hear in both of those spaces so much that's happening in terms of like international policy and regulation, that's going to start to add some of those guardrails. So some of the things we've talked about around transparency and privacy and ethics, I think are going to become really live conversations and really, really important conversations. I know there's groups like SMR that are already holding some of those, and Insights Association that's holding some of those conversations for us, for our industry. And I think those are going to take on like a really, really important space. I'm not sure what all of the outcomes will look like. I hope that they center privacy and transparency and ethics and integrity in ways that really empower respondents and to make choices around how their data can be used, and also empower organizations to be able to understand what's going on with the data that they're using. But I think that's going to be a really important part of, especially over the next 5 years, that that's going to be a huge piece of what's going on. And then I also hope we get better at working well. Yes. Like we've gone through as an industry a challenging period of time, as have a whole number of other industries. And I think a lot of us are working out now like remote work and work-life balance, and like this pace of change isn't going to change. I'm a single mom. I have 3 kids. I'm always balancing all of those things. I know you've got kids as well. And so I hope as an industry, we continue to figure out how we do the important work that we're doing, while also supporting the people who are doing the work to have really healthy, holistic, and fulfilling lives. That's important too.
No, it is a very good point. There was one other thing that I think that will be quite important moving forward. Auditability of human-generated contributions or content. So people being able to know this was generated by a real person. So whether that's on like YouTube, on social media, through our responses, respondent, etc. as well. So I think that will all come up as well at some point in time. We need people contributing their own thoughts, their own feelings, etc. That's what's going to drive our industry. Synthetic data may have its place, probably will, but we also need to continue to keep humans there as well.
Yeah, and I think that becomes like that cycle becomes so important when we were talking about transparency. Like that's one of the most important components of transparency is where did this data actually come from? And then we start to get into layers of that, right? So if you've got synthetic data and then you've trained on synthetic data, or not even synthetic data, you've just got AI generated content that hasn't been human reviewed and has inaccuracies or bias in it. And we see this in data all the time. I can tell a story. We had a data set that came through, part of why we have human review built into everything that happens. So we had a data set and it was 20,000 responses, what comes to mind when you think about a certain place in the world. And when it ran and everything was looking beautiful and oh my gosh, so many themes and codes and you can like quantify all of the qual and huzzah. And then I jumped over to the sentiment as we're doing that final human review. And I was like, oh darn, everything that was written in a language that wasn't English, and this was about a place in the Middle East, so it was about a different, some of the names of places were in languages that weren't English, were coded as negative sentiment. And we'd never trained on, our proprietary LLM on that. And so, like I said, it pulls from a couple of different places. So that means it was pulling from one of the open AIs to be able to, or APIs to be able to code that data. And it pulled in the bias that we have in Western language around, some other parts of the world, and applied that to the sentiment. But because we have human review, we could just like change that really, really quickly, rerun it and be like, actually, those are neutral. Run again, please. Okay, cool, deliver. And now everything that gets trained moving forward is trained on that accuracy. But it's super, super important that we have, when I'm talking about transparency, that's what I really, really mean. Like you can get right into the weeds and be able to be like, yeah, no, that's wrong. We're going to fix it. And then training on something moving forward. And that's not happening everywhere. And that's some of the pieces, I think, just building on what you were talking about the importance of being able to really understand what was created by a human, what was trained on what, and therefore, what can I trust? And how do I build an understanding of what kind of biases might show up so I know what to be looking for when we haven't had that human review, because not every company is taking the same approach as we are.
Very true. Hopefully they will at some stage.
Hopefully they're going to be regulated and have to. But in the meantime.
Nice. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Tovah.
Thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
It has been. And thank you to the listeners as well. If you have liked what you've heard today, feel free to leave a review, subscribe to the podcast, or share this conversation that we've had with others who might also find it useful, helpful, or interesting. Until next time, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.